February 1945. A rail shed outside Cherbourg. 36 German women were ordered to face the wall. Their boots were split open at the soles. Their coats were stiff with mud. One of them had not eaten anything hot in 4 days, and every woman in that room believed the next sound would be a rifle butt. They had been told what the Americans did to prisoners. They had been told there would be screaming. They had been told there would be hands on them. They had been told that mercy was a trick used by weak nations before the real punishment began. So when the door slid open on its rusted track, no one turned around. Not at first. They only listened. Boots came in across the concrete. Then another sound. Canvas dragging, buckles clicking, a man breathing hard from the weight of what he was carrying. And then a wool blanket fell over Greta Fischer's shoulders. Not a fist, not a weapon, a blanket. That was the moment the war became harder for her to understand. Greta was 24 years old. Before the uniform, before the lists and the orders and the long retreat west, she had worked behind the counter of her aunt's bakery in Bremen. She knew how to slice dark rye without crushing it. She knew which old men wanted yesterday's rolls because they were cheaper. She knew how to smile at customers even when the flour was rationed and the shelves looked more like a promise than a shop. Then the war took the men. Then it took the windows. Then it took the city, piece by piece. By the end, it had taken almost everything except obedience. Greta had never been a soldier in the way the word sounds in newsreels. She had never stormed a beach or fired into a tree line. She had stamped forms, carried messages, counted supply crates, and slept wherever the retreating office could find a floor. But uniforms do not explain that difference to the people who capture you. And in February 1945, as Germany was collapsing from both sides, Greta and 35 other female auxiliaries were moved through a string of holding points until they reached that damaged rail shed near the French coast. Outside, the harbor cranes stood like broken ribs against a white sky. Inside, the women waited for what they thought came next. Greta remembered the silence most clearly. Not because the room was quiet. It was not. The wind was whining through shell holes. Someone near the back was coughing blood into a scarf. A French guard was turning the pages of a clipboard. Somewhere beyond the wall, an engine kept starting and dying. But beneath all of that, the women had gone silent in the particular way people go silent when fear has used up language. Then the American medic stepped behind her. He did not speak German. Greta spoke almost no English. For 1 second she believed the blanket was only the beginning of something worse. Then the wool settled around her neck. It was heavy. It smelled faintly of soap, canvas, and storage dust. It held a warmth that did not belong in that building. She turned her head just enough to see him. He was young, too young for the exhaustion in his face. There was dried mud along one sleeve and a bandage around 2 fingers of his left hand. His hands were trembling, not with rage, with cold, maybe with fatigue, maybe with the effort of carrying too many blankets through a storm. But Greta would spend the rest of her life remembering that detail. The enemy's hands shook while giving her warmth. His name was Daniel Hart. She would not learn that for many years. That night, he was only the man who placed wool on her shoulders and moved to the next prisoner without waiting to be thanked. Across the shed, the same thing was happening again and again. A blanket over one woman, then another, then another. No speeches, no insults, no triumphant lecture from the victorious army. Only soldiers moving between prisoners with bundles of army wool, tin cups, field dressings, and a blackened kettle that hissed on a portable stove. The first woman began crying when a medic handed her hot water. The second began crying when he turned away so she could wash her face. By the time the 36th blanket had been unfolded, the entire room had changed temperature, not only in the air, in the mind. Because cruelty would have made sense. Cruelty would have fit the story they had been fed since girlhood. It would have confirmed every poster, every radio speech, every warning about the animal armies of the West. But this did not fit, and that made it almost unbearable. A French interpreter named Marcel stood near the door and watched the women break in a way he had seen before among prisoners. He had a word for it. Not relief. Relief was too simple. This was the collapse of a lie that had been load-bearing. These women were not innocent of the world that had made them. They had lived inside it. They had repeated what was safe to repeat. They had looked away from what was dangerous to know. But propaganda had done something even deeper than frighten them. It had trained them to believe decency from an enemy was impossible. And now that impossibility was wrapped around Greta's shoulders. A blanket can be heavier than a verdict. That first night, the Americans treated frostbite, infection, hunger, and shock. They cut open boots that had frozen around swollen feet. They warmed water by the stove and poured it into dented basins. They passed out thin soup that smelled mostly of salt and onions and still made one woman cover her mouth because the smell of food hurt too much. Daniel Hart knelt beside a prisoner named Ilse, whose toes had turned the gray-white color medics hate to see. He worked carefully, too carefully almost, as if one rough movement could return the room to war. When he finished wrapping her feet, he touched the floor twice with his knuckles, pointed to the bandage, and said the only German word he seemed to know. Gut. Good. It was the wrong word for the situation. It was also the only word he had. Ilse laughed once, a broken sound that turned into weeping. Daniel looked at Marcel, helpless. Marcel translated nothing. There was nothing to translate. Near midnight, a radio somewhere in the shed caught a weak signal from an American station. The song kept fading in and out. Most of the women did not understand a single lyric. Greta did not need to. The melody moved through the room the way heat does, finding cracks. She sat with the blanket pulled up to her chin and watched the medics around the stove. They did not look heroic. That mattered. Heroes would have made the moment simpler. These were tired men with chapped hands and dirty collars, men who had seen dead friends, men who had crossed Normandy and the flooded roads and winter fields full of bodies. Men who had reasons, if reasons were all a person needed, to hate every German face they saw. Instead, they were arguing quietly over whether there was enough coffee left for the morning. Greta slept on concrete that night. For the first time in weeks, she was warm enough to dream. In the morning, she woke afraid. The body remembers faster than the mind. Her eyes opened to rafters, broken glass, gray light. Then she heard boots outside and pulled the blanket tighter, waiting for the correction. Surely kindness could not continue into daylight. Surely morning would reveal the trick. But the door opened, and Daniel Hart came in carrying a metal pot with both hands. Behind him were two more soldiers with crates. Oatmeal, coffee, bread cut into uneven pieces. Marcel called out in German, "Breakfast!" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Greta stood. Not because she was brave, because hunger can sometimes do what courage cannot. She took the tin bowl from Daniel. Their fingers touched for less than a second. He stepped back quickly, almost apologetically. The oatmeal was thin. The coffee was bitter. The bread was not fresh. Greta would remember that meal as if it had been a feast laid out under chandeliers, not because of the food, because no one demanded anything from her in exchange. No confession, no performance of gratitude, no speech, no proof that she deserved to be fed. She was hungry. They fed her. That was all. And that was too much. By the second day, the women had begun building little islands of order. The nurses among them checked fevers. The older women divided the bread. Greta, who had spent a life arranging loaves on shelves, found herself folding the blankets after each sleep period with an exactness that made Ilse tease her. "Do you think the Americans inspect corners?" Greta looked down at the square of wool in her hands. "No," she said. "I think I just need it to stay real." The Americans stayed 3 days. Only 3. Long enough for the women to stop flinching every time a medic crossed the room. Long enough for warm water to become believable. Long enough for Daniel Hart to learn 2 more German words. Langsam, slowly, and bitte, please. Then the handover came. A French administrative unit took control of the prisoners. The Americans packed the stove, the radio, the medical crates, and the extra rations. The French officers were not monsters. That almost made it worse. They were tired men managing too many prisoners with too little fuel and no interest in the private collapse of 36 German women in a rail shed. Their mercy was procedural. Their indifference was efficient. Within one afternoon, the room became colder. The blankets remained. The rest disappeared. Daniel Hart stood near the truck before he left, tightening a strap over a canvas crate. Greta watched from the shed doorway. She wanted to say something. Thank you was too small. Forgive me was not hers to ask. I was wrong was not complete enough. So she said nothing. Daniel looked toward the doorway once. He lifted one hand. Not a salute, not a wave exactly, just proof that he had seen her standing there. Then the truck pulled away through the mud. Greta did not cry until the sound was gone. The weeks after that were gray. Gray soup, gray sky, gray paperwork, gray faces behind desks. The prisoners were moved inland to a camp built from wooden barracks and wire that looked almost embarrassed by its own existence. Nobody tried to run. There was nowhere to run to. Europe itself had become a waiting room. Every morning, a list. Every noon, rations. Every evening, cold boards and counting. The women learned the new language of survival. Wait here. Stand there. Name. Age. Birthplace. Previous assignment. Relatives living. Relatives unknown. When asked her occupation, Greta said, bakery clerk. The French officer glanced at her uniform. Not anymore, he said. That was all. Marcel came twice a week to translate forms. On the 3rd visit, he brought Greta a small notebook with a blue cover and 3 pencils tied together with string. You keep looking at the margins of newspapers, he said. Greta did not deny it. What should I write? What happened? Who would care about a blanket? Marcel looked toward the barracks, then back at her. Not enough people, he said. That is why you should write it. So she did. At first, badly. She wrote facts because facts were safer than feelings. 36 women, 3 days of American care, 1 field stove, 2 basins, frostbite on Ilse's feet, a radio that failed whenever the wind rose, a young medic who said "gut" at the wrong time. Then the notebook began pulling harder. She wrote what she had believed would happen. She wrote what did happen. She wrote about the shame of being relieved. She wrote about the terror of kindness from men she had been taught to despise. She wrote the sentence she could not say aloud. I do not know what part of me broke when he gave me the blanket. By April, the war was almost over. The maps said one thing, the faces said another. News came into the camp in torn pieces. Cities in Germany opened. Other places opened too. Camps with names the women had heard whispered and denied and explained away for years. Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau. Not rumors now, photographs, film, testimony. Bodies that could not be argued into metaphor. This is where Greta's story stops being simple. Because the blanket did not erase what had been done. It made it harder to hide from. A person can reject cruelty from a cruel enemy and remain unchanged. But what do you do with mercy from an enemy who has just uncovered your country's crimes? What do you do when the people you were told had no conscience are the ones filming the evidence your neighbors refuse to name? One evening, Ilse asked the question the whole barracks was trying not to ask. Did you know? Greta had the notebook open on her knees. The pencil did not move. After a long time, she said, I knew enough to be afraid of knowing more. No one answered. Outside, rain ticked against the barrack roof. In May, Germany surrendered. The announcement did not sound like victory in the camp. It sounded like a door opening onto a room no one wanted to enter. Repatriation took longer than anyone expected. There were millions of displaced people across Europe. Railways were broken. Records were missing. Whole families existed only as questions on forms. Greta's name reached a transport list in June. Destination, Bremen. Home. But home is a dangerous word after a war. It promises a place that may no longer exist. The convoy crossed into Germany under a sky so clear it felt indecent. Greta sat in the back of a truck with the blanket folded on her lap and the blue notebook inside her coat. At a checkpoint, a British officer handed Marcel a leaflet. Marcel read it, went very still, and passed it to the women. It contained photographs from the camps. Greta looked once and wanted to look away. Then she made herself look again, not because looking made her better, because looking away had become part of the crime. She folded the leaflet and placed it between the pages of the notebook. The blanket and the photographs now traveled in the same bag. She hated that. She knew it was necessary. Bremen, in the summer of 1945, smelled of brick dust, river mud, smoke, and boiled cabbage. The street where the bakery had stood was still there on the map. On the ground, it was a line of broken walls and gaps where families had once slept above shops. Greta found the bakery by the cellar steps. Everything above them was gone. She stood where the counter should have been and remembered the sound of paper being folded around bread, a memory so ordinary it hurt worse than the ruins. Her aunt was dead. Her mother was missing. Her father had last been seen on a repair crew near the docks. No one knew more. That night, a neighbor gave Greta a cot in a room under a slanted roof. Greta laid the American blanket over herself and opened the notebook. She did not write about grief first. She wrote about the leaflet, then the blanket, then the leaflet again, because the two things had begun arguing inside her, and she understood that if she did not write honestly, she would become like everyone else in the streets below, sweeping rubble into neat piles and calling that recovery. The city became an education in careful forgetting. People learned which sentences were safe. I was never political. We heard rumors. You could not ask questions. What could one person do? Some of those sentences were true. Some were hiding places. Most were both. Greta hated how much she understood them. She had not been a monster. That comforted her for exactly one day. Then the notebook asked the harder question. What had ordinary meant, if ordinary people were what the system had used? She began working at a school in 1947, first as an assistant, then as a teacher when there were not enough trained people left to fill the rooms. The children wore coats indoors. The windows were patched with oiled paper. The stove smoked whenever the wind shifted. They were children who knew too much about sirens and not enough about truth. Greta taught them arithmetic, spelling, the shape of rivers, the names of countries whose soldiers had stood over their parents with clipboards. And sometimes, on the coldest days, she brought the blanket from the cedar box where she kept it. She laid it across her desk, not dramatically. She did not want drama. She wanted evidence. This was given to me by an enemy, she told them. The first time, the classroom went still. A boy named Otto crossed his arms. My father says Americans only did that for propaganda. Greta nodded. Your father may be right about some Americans. Otto looked surprised. Greta touched the worn edge of the blanket. But that night, in that rail shed, one man had a choice in his hands. He could make the room colder, or he could make it warmer. He chose warmer. The boy frowned. That does not make them good. No, Greta said. It makes the choice real. That became the center of her teaching. Not clean innocence, not easy guilt, not the cheap comfort of dividing the dead into angels and devils. She taught that history is made of systems, and systems are made of people, and people are always choosing something, sometimes loudly, usually quietly. A signature, a silence, a door not opened, a question not asked, a blanket placed over a prisoner's shoulders. Years passed. The city rebuilt around the holes it could not fill. Greta never married. She kept teaching. She kept writing. By 1960, the blue notebook had become 5 notebooks. By 1975, 9. She wrote names when she could. She wrote gaps when she could not. She wrote memories before they became smoother than they deserved. Every first frost, she unfolded the blanket and sat with it for 1 hour. Only one. She believed memory needed discipline. Too little, and it became denial. Too much, and it became a room you never left. In 1978, a package arrived from Kansas. Greta recognized none of the names on the envelope. Inside was a letter from an old man named Daniel Hart. He wrote that he had served as an army medic in France in the last winter of the war. He wrote that he had spent years wondering whether any of the women in the Cherbourg shed survived. He wrote that an archive worker had found a prisoner list with Greta Fisher's name. Then, at the bottom, he wrote one sentence. "I still remember the way you held the blanket before you trusted it." Greta read that line 3 times. Then she sat down before her knees could fail. For 33 years, she had carried the night as if it belonged mostly to her. Now she understood something that made the room feel larger. He had carried it too. Not with the same weight, not with the same shame, not with the same questions, but he had carried it. 2 people on opposite sides of an ocean had spent half a lifetime keeping evidence of the same small mercy. Greta wrote back. She told him about the school, about Otto, about the children who touched the blanket with 2 fingers as if it might still be warm, about the notebooks, about the leaflet from the camps tucked between the early pages because she refused to let the mercy become an excuse. She ended the letter with a sentence she had taken 30 years to earn. "The blanket did not forgive us. It taught me what forgiveness would require." Daniel Hart died before they could meet. His daughter sent Greta a photograph of him from the veterans' home, an old man in a chair by a window, one hand resting on a cane, the other holding a folded sheet of paper. Greta placed the photograph in the 10th notebook, not beside the story of the blanket, but beside the lesson plan she had used with Otto's class. That was where it belonged. Greta died in 1996 in the same rebuilt city where she had once returned with nothing but a notebook and enemy wool. Her former students found the notebooks in numbered boxes. The blanket was folded separately, wrapped in brown paper. On the paper, in Greta's handwriting, were 6 words. "Do not make this story easy." They obeyed. The exhibit that opened 2 years later was small. 1 room in a local archive near the river. No grand entrance, no marble, no triumphant music. A rail shed photograph on the wall, a map of displaced persons' routes, copies of Camp Liberation leaflets under glass, Greta's notebooks, Daniel Hart's letter. And in the center, the blanket. Not cleaned until it looked new, not mounted like a flag, just a worn army blanket, gray-green, frayed on one edge, ordinary enough to be mistaken for nothing. That was its power. School groups came on winter mornings. Some children rushed through the room. Some stopped. Some stared at the blanket longer than anyone expected. A teacher once asked the class what the object proved. One girl said, "That the American was kind." Another said, "That Greta remembered." A third, quieter child said, "That somebody can disobey hatred without making a speech." The teacher wrote that answer in the guest book. Greta would have liked it, because that was the truth she had spent her life protecting. The blanket did not end a war. It did not resurrect the dead. It did not clean the camps. It did not rebuild Bremen. It did not make the guilty innocent or the broken whole. It did one smaller thing. And history, if it is honest, must have room for smaller things. It kept one terrified woman warm on a night when she expected violence. It proved that propaganda had lied about the size of the human soul. It gave that woman a piece of evidence she could carry into classrooms, into shame, into memory, into age. One man did not fix the world. He made one room less cruel. And because Greta wrote it down, that room did not disappear. That is how moral inheritance often works. Not as thunder, not as statues, not as perfect nations teaching perfect lessons, but as one choice passed hand to hand until the person who made it is gone, the person who received it is gone, and the object remains behind glass, still asking the living what they will do when the room expects them to be colder. The last line in Greta's final notebook was not about war. It was not about victory. It was not even about Daniel Hart. It was about the room. She wrote, "The room wanted hatred from all of us. The blanket was proof that one man refused." And that is why it survived, not because it was rare wool, not because it belonged to a famous soldier, not because a battle turned on it. The blanket survived because one night in a room built by war, somebody chose not to obey the room.